So Luigi, last episode we were looking at the components in a microcomputer, and this episode we're going to look at one of those in more detail. The CPU, what can you tell me about it?
So I think it stands for the Central Processing Unit. It does the calculations, I think, and it's almost the main brain of the computer.
Yeah, absolutely. It does all of the thinking and the calculating for
Yeah.
us. So I've got some photos here for us. So from the BBC microcomputer by Acorn, we've got the MOS chip, known as the 6502. Underneath that, we've got the MOS 6510, which the Commodore 64 used, and then we've got one by Zilog, the Z80, used in both the Amstrad and the Spectrum computer. They all look pretty similar, don't they?
Yeah.
And I think we'll agree that by having a good look at those, we can understand exactly how they work.
Yeah.
Yeah?
No.
No, it's a bit more complicated than black boxes,
Yeah.
isn't it? So I think if we start with this, so there's different types of information that need to travel through a CPU, because ultimately it's all about moving data from one place to another and sometimes doing mathematical calculations with that data.
Yeah.
So different types of data going through the computer might be data from the keyboard to the computer. That's an input that you're telling the computer to do something. Same with joystick movements and buttons. That's data going in. That has to go through the CPU as well. And anything that's loaded from the tape player as well may go through the CPU. And then you've got all of the outputs as well. So that's information going to the speakers for music and going to the monitor so that you can see the visuals. Yeah? You were looking around there for something.
I was looking for the speakers.
Oh, well, the speaker is built into the monitor in our case, yeah. So you've got all of those ins and outs, and then you've got calculations going on with some of that data as well as part of the programs that we're running. And that means that there's three different types of instruction or data that has to travel through the CPU. You've got the controller data, so that's the data that's telling the CPU what to do with information and when to record it and when to send it somewhere else. That's like the control data. You've got the data, which is actually what's being read and worked on. And then you've got the what's called the addressing data. So if the CPU has finished doing something, it's got a number and it needs to send it off to the memory, there needs to be some data that says this is where you're sending it to in the memory. This is the part, okay? But all of that data is in binary. Do you know what binary data is?
Isn't it just ones and zeros?
Yeah.
And doesn't one mean that the transistor, I think it's called, switch, is, I think one is that it's on, and zero is that there's no power going to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like voltage driven, isn't it? So
Yeah,
voltage means 1, no voltage means 0. And that's the most complicated thing that a computer can really truly understand. It's either got voltage or it hasn't. Now there's a whole system of counting, so you can actually count past the number 1 using ones and zeros, and you can understand keyboard inputs and joystick movements and memory locations and everything using this language of zeros and ones that we might do another video on some other time. But essentially the CPU uses ones and zeros to do all of that communicating that I was just talking about. And the way it transfers the information around the CPU into different registers, which are the temporary place where the data is held. They've got those different registers within the CPU. In order to move them around, the data has to be moved across wires, and those wires are called buses. And it's the same principle. If the wires are holding a voltage, then they're in a state of 1. And if they're not, then they're in 0.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's all modern CPUs, and when we say modern, we mean going back for decades really now. But modern CPUs work on something called the von Neumann architecture, and that means that they have registers in them, and some of the registers are worked on using an arithmetic logic unit, or an ALU, which actually knows how to do the calculations on different bits of data that are coming in. And everything that you do on a computer, it doesn't matter how pretty it looks, how boring it looks, how great it sounds, how exciting and interesting a game is, it's all going through that CPU, and it's all being broken down into a simple language of zeros and ones.
Yeah.
And that is the simplest way, I think, I can explain CPUs to a little Luigi.
Okay.
Any questions?
Not really. Except, actually, yeah, I do have one.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're saying that those ones and zeros are what brings up those like and subscribe buttons under our videos, that we would really like you to just press them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and all of the YouTube algorithm and search engines and everything that we know on the internet, all of the computers that are running factories around the world, they all work on ones and zeros and basically need processors to keep them all in check. Good. I hope you enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Right, let's move on to our next section then.
Yes.
Time to play.
Yes.